everyone, and welcome to our Fresh Squeeze Gallery Talk. We're excited to see you all here. My name is Amanda Cooper, and I'm the Chief Curator of the Mary-Helen Horne Center. That is Chris Andrews. He's our exhibitions assistant. He will be recording this tonight, but no pressure. So everyone be on your best behavior. This will be uploaded to our YouTube channel later, so if you know anyone who maybe wanted to come but couldn't be here tonight, it'll be ready probably within the next week. Very briefly, before I introduce the artists, I wanted to talk a little bit about Fresh Squeeze. How many of you have seen a past Fresh Squeeze exhibition? All right, not many of you. Rachel, you have. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll leave you alone. So this is Fresh Squeeze 9, which means this is the 9th year. And we started the Fresh Squeeze program back in 2017 when the Morian was celebrating 100 years in this community. So we were thinking of a exhibition program that we could do where we're highlighting emerging artists, which is something the Morian has done for over 100 years, but we wanted to do it in a way that was very intentional. So the idea of Fresh Squeeze was born. And it is a statewide show, so it's open to any artist in the state of Florida and any emerging artist. And the way that we define an emerging artist for the purposes of this program is any artist living in Florida who has never had a solo show in the state. So if you're an artist who maybe has shown quite a bit in group shows, you would still be eligible for this show. We don't count EFA and NFA exhibitions because if you have to have those solo shows to graduate. So if we took those out of the way, we wouldn't have anyone with our degree apply. So those are exceptions. But anyway, so in 9 years, I don't have my stats in front of me, but I think we've shown 50 some odd artists. We pick 6 to 8 each year. This year was the most because we were able to add 2 to the Jubilee collection across the street and tie those spaces together. So, and it truly is a statewide show. Out of those 50 some odd artists, we've had artists from Pensacola, Jacksonville, Orlando, Gainesville, down to Miami, and many cities in between. So it's a great exhibition. It is one of my favorite things that we do all year, and it really takes the pulse of what's going on in our state. And it's after this many years, it's developed kind of a community of artists where they get to know each other a little bit. They follow each other on social media. Some of them, because we work a lot with art institutions, just because of the nature of the show. We've had artists who are in the exhibition as students, and then they become teachers in some instances, and then they recommend the show to their students. So it's after 9 years, it's really kind of become a thing of its own. So we have 8 artists this year, and we're doing 4 gallery talks with 2 artists each time. 3 of the gallery talks are online, and this is the only one that's in person, so how lucky are we to be able to, it's always better to see the work in person and to be able to meet the artist in person. So a little bit about, so we're going to hear from Mary-Helen first, and we'll have a brief Q&A session, and then we'll move to the far gallery, and then we're going to hear from Stella, who came all the way from Orlando to be here for this talk. So thank you. Well, you came from the distance as well. You fought that bridge. So anyway, I usually like the artists to talk more than I am, so I'm going to be quiet in a minute. But I am very excited about Mary-Helen being in the show this year. I usually, again, I don't know the stats for it, but usually the artists that are in Fresh Squeeze, I don't know them ahead of time. But that's not the case. I've known Mary-Helen for several years. She's been a member of the Morian for a while. Several years. And she's 2018, okay. And I'm familiar with her work. And I just love her story. I don't want to say much about it, but she is I don't want this to sound weird, she's a poster child for the Morian and what we do here. She loves the Morian loves her. I really am thrilled that she's in the show this year for many, many reasons. I could go on about them, but I don't want to talk about you too much because it's more interesting hearing from the artist. So without further ado, Mary-Helen.
Thank you. for you or anything like that. So thank you, Amanda. And I'm going to plant a question first. I want you to all think about trees you have known and why they're special to you. And if we have time, we'll actually highlight it, but we'll get back to that. So that's just something for you to ruminate on. And I just want to say, let's continue the love fest, because I do love the Morian. Morian is where my art journey started. I mean, I had done art as a hobby, but my serious art journey started here. I took a couple of printmaking classes here, and in fact, one of my teachers was a former fresh squeezed artist. I think maybe the first year, but Barry Goodman was my teacher, and he was phenomenal, got me really hooked on printmaking. And I heard about fresh squeeze probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and loved the idea, and just sort of thought, that would be really nice if I could be a fresh squeezed artist. And it never occurred to me, well, it did a little, but I had never really expected it to happen. And so when it happened, Lynn works in the same studio group with me, and so she knew that this was a major goal for me. And so being here is just, it's phenomenal. I haven't stopped pinching myself. It's highly competitive. I didn't realize how competitive and how prestigious it really is. So being part of this group is just an astonishing honor. And then to be able to get closer to Amanda and get to know her team with Chris and other people, it's just been a real privilege. And so, and in spite of all of that, you guys have made me feel like I'm doing you a favor. So it's the way you treat your artists, the way you bring us along, the way you connect us to the community, and what you do to connect the community to art is just a very cool thing. So congratulations and thank you for that. This is my first piece that I ever entered into a show, of course, at the Morian. It was a member show, and I got an honorable mention. It's Miami Ibis. For those of you might have heard sort of shades of the Beatles in that. But it is, the honorable mention was all the encouragement I ever needed to say, okay, it's time for me to retire from my 40-year career as a corporate operations executive and move into art making. So let's do that. So that's what I did. And let's see how this goes. Yes. So what's printmaking? Let's talk a little bit about that. I guess somebody could probably correct everything I'm going to tell you right here. But it's, before I start, how many of you besides you and Rachel have actually, and Stella, have actually done any printmaking? Great. Okay. So just know that printmakers do everything painters do, only we do it backwards and under pressure. Meaning that what we do is we start with a plate, and I brought a few to share, to send around. But basically we have a plate, and it can be a plain plate that you just ink and you paint on like you do when you use ink. And then you have, or you can carve it, or you can etch it. And basically, the image is here. Then you put a piece of paper over it and you run it through the press. This is Patsy, by the way. She's named for my mother. And at 2,500 pounds, she does not exert as much pressure as my mother did. And I say that with all the love and affection I had for my mother. Anyway, so, and so when it comes out of the press, it comes out backwards. So that's what I meant by backwards. And a lot of printmakers do, I'm going to send one of these around. You can start looking at those. A lot of printmakers make additions, multiples. That was the whole idea, right? Is we want art to be more accessible to people, so let's find a way to make more of it more accessible. And so the idea was of multiples were born. And when you make a bunch of these, they're actually individual originals. They're not copies, they're not reproductions. Each piece takes as much here's another one. This is dry point. This is an intaglio process. Basically, it means you're incising an image into a plate. This is PETG. It's a very soft plastic. And you put the ink on and you smoosh it into the grooves and wipe a little bit of it off, and you get fine lines. So that's another thing I do. And basically, but I do them in different combinations and in different colors. So every single thing is an original composition. So I don't work in multiples. And there I go. So this, I'm showing you kind of how it works. Every piece has multiple plates and multiple images all combined. This, I'm going to show you what's in here, is pretty much the same sets of blocks that I used for these two images on the pink wall. And you can see this case, this is a background. I start with the backgrounds, I ink the background. You notice that there was some white imagery on there because I take my linoleum blocks, I run it through the press on top of the background image or plate, and then I pull them apart and it takes the ink away. And that's how I get my whites. You don't use white ink in printmaker, at least I don't. I don't know if you guys do. But I don't. I let the paper give me the white and light that I need. So you can see her going like crazy. This is a case where I have linoleum blocks face to face, and they create a kind of a texture, which you can almost see in this image. You can kind of see, it's not a very good photograph, but you can kind of see some of the other markings in there, and that's because the ink is kind of moving back and forth. And why do I do that? Well, I like to interrupt the image. I don't like to have just a straight graphic impression. I like to see it kind of softened and moved around, gives it more of an ephemeral look, I think. Here I'm using what is called a la coupe to apply some ink on the giant linoleum block. And then after that, I will start putting it on the paper. And so it's just, once you get all the ink, the plates inking, it usually takes me 2 to 3 days to ink plates for these larger pieces. And then we start printing. As you can see, it's a little physical. I'm doing a lot of running around because I have to adjust the tension. But in the end, that's where the magic happens, is in the layering. Because then you're getting the ink combining with itself in different, it evolves different colors. The light bounces around the layers, and it just gives it some dimension and some depth. And this particular piece that I'm printing in this video is, again, based on many of the similar blocks. It was done for the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay's 35th anniversary. It's a commission. I'm really proud to be part of that. So that was exciting for me to get that offer. I think first we might have had something. See where this is going to take me. Yes. So what do I do? My work celebrates the fragile diversity of our natural environment, especially in Florida, and especially trees, or treeness. And where this kind of started was when I grew up in Michigan, a child in Michigan. My father was an entomologist, and he didn't want to cut the trees down around our house. So I was surrounded by woods, and I would go out into the woods and wander around with my imaginary friends, and we'd have all these wonderful conversations with the trees. And the trees would listen to us, and they were very supportive, and they were very sympathetic, and they were just wonderful companions. Sad to say, I did a Google search, and a lot of those trees are gone. They've been replaced by suburban houses. Like 90% of the forests around the world have been deforested, made way for agriculture, or urbanization, commodities, or even just as effect of climate change. And so that's kind of the basis for this exhibition. And that's where I got the idea or the notion of future memories of trees not yet lost. That's the theme of this exhibition. The idea that one day, if we don't change a tree is a wondrous thing that shelters, feeds, and protects all living things. It even offers shade to the axemen who destroy it. So my work pays homage to these great and wonderful creatures who do so much for us, and they ask nothing in return but to be left alone to get on with giving us the very air we breathe. I'm going to talk about two pieces in particular. This one is Vanishing Connection. It's over here. And this was a response to a personal experience we had. We came back from a vacation, and a whole acre of land that I passed every day on my commute to my studio was just clear cut. It was just gone. All that was left were these piles of trees that had been yanked up by the roots and just left there waiting, and we were waiting for, I assume, some ignominious fate like mulching or fuel or something like that. But the whole acre of land, or it was really a little more than that, was just decimated. And so I started working on an idea expressing how I felt with that. One thing about printmaking is when you run a plate through the press and onto the paper, there's always a residual layer of ink left. It doesn't completely come off the plate. And what that is that's the ghost. And so what I was able to do in this case is I printed the red tree, then I just moved the plate over, and I put the paper back down, ran it back through the press, and then I did it 2 more times. And that gave me the sense of vanishing. The other side, and I mentioned putting the linoleum blocks together and pulling the ink away, and that's what I did with the blue side of the press. So you kind of get the sense of a ghost, sort of the haunting the clear-cut land, and then the idea that forests are vanishing. Sorry if that's kind of beating you over the head with symbology, but, and then there were these 2 power utility poles on either side of the lot, which are now connecting to apparently a very much needed convenience store. And so some people think it's more needed than others, I think. So that's what's behind this piece. Oh, I went too far, sorry. Oh well, we'll just do that. The other, let's talk about the giant elephant tree in the room. Have any of you read the book, The Overstory by Richard Powers? I highly recommend it. It's kind of a thick one. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. And it's about trees, and it's about humans' relationship to trees, and it's about the future of the earth and how trees affect that. It's a beautifully written book, and it really has sort of guided a lot of my artistic work. And I wanted, when I was applying for a squeeze, I knew I needed something dimensional. And I knew I needed to take the trees out of 2D and make them 3D. And so I started working on this, and I started collecting like hangers from my friends. And so this is about 60% recycled material, upcycled, failed prints are stuffed in there, and around the armature, wrapped around the armature, and I even have some shopping bags in there and stuff like that. And then I made some prints on Thai kozo paper, which is a very thin mulberry paper. It's thin, but it's strong. And so I made a bunch of these, and I then cut them up and tore them up and collaged them around the branches and around the canopy, which is actually a PVC material. And then I cut squares of the prints and did a modified Turkish map fold, for those of you who care, and wired it together. I even put some glitter on there, which was probably a mistake. But the name of the sculpture is Still, again, coming from the He doesn't really explain the use of that word, so I am free to interpret it in two ways. The first is, be still. Live slowly. Expand in your space. Sink deep roots and connect with your community as trees do. The other meaning is we still have time to preserve and conserve. Of course, there's about by some estimates, there's about 3 trillion trees left on Earth. That's a lot. But trees do their best works in woodlands and in forests. And like just in the North American continent, there's only about 4% of the forests remaining. So it's dwindling. Forests are dwindling. It's pretty sad, especially in South America, in the Amazon rainforests. Used to be called the lungs of the earth. Well, they are being deforested on a daily basis to the point where they've passed the point where they're actually now expelling more carbon than they're sequestering. Rainforests are. So the way I look at it is we still do have time to change the way we value the living tree. Just thinking about the value of the tree as a living thing instead of putting our value on the land that they stand on and the commodities we can make from them. I'll just say this, I'll give you this one specific quote from the other story. When you cut down a tree, what you make from it should be at least as miraculous as what you cut down. So, what's your favorite tree? Do you have a story about a favorite tree? If you don't want to share it here, and I don't know how much time we have, I don't want to cut into someone's time, but if you do have a tree story, please share it with us on Instagram at Fresh Squeezed Trees. We'd love to hear some. So, thanks for coming. Any questions?
Yeah,
Sure, Rachel.
those telephone poles, were they cut out or you had a stencil or what? How did you go?
Line of go. I also did some dry points, but I think the line of cut was more effective in the way I did it. Because again, I was able to do the back and forth. You can't do that so easily with a dry point.
Yeah.
So I was able to do the back and forth inking and the negative, so I was able to get a little bit more of an effect.
It always looks like a watercolor that you used.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
I love it when somebody comes to my studio and says, "What is this?" What are you doing? That's exactly what I want to hear. I don't want the process to be too obvious.
Do you use a water base or oil base?
I use Akua, which is a soy-based ink,
Okay.
and that means it's water miscible, so I can wash it up with soap and water. Now you can do that with oil inks now, but what I love about the Akua inks, I'm getting a little technical now, so this is a conversation for the evening. But the beauty about the Akua inks that you can't do so much with oil is A, I can run the same piece of paper through the ink with multiple plates, and I don't have to wait for the ink to dry between layers. So that's a big deal for me because I'm real impatient. The other thing is I can leave the inks out forever on my inking table. I don't have to clean it up after each session, which is really great because I'm sloppy. So I can just like leave it at the end of the day and go home. I can take 3 days and ink the plates and they'll stay nice and moist. The reason is that Akua inks absorb through the paper. They don't absorb, they don't dry in the air. So they dry through the paper, not the air.
Because the paper is wet.
No, this is
Uh,
itching.
Porous.
I do, it only goes so big. For the palms on the other side of the pink wall, they're too big for the paper. I had to buy a roll of paper, so I could cut it 48 inches. And that I had to dampen, and so I was able to do that. But again, as long as you keep the paper moist, you can keep on printing. You don't have to wait for it to dry. It's a great thing.
Stupid question probably, but here goes.
No stupid questions.
Your leaves on your trees are just so accurate, and even the electric pole, so accurate. Do you project something from a real life photo, or do you freehand all of this?
Oh, that's a great question.
I mean,
I'm
just amazed. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you. I don't consider myself a realistic, but you're right, it's definitely objective. I start with a photograph, so I take a lot of walks, and I take a lot of photos on my mobile iPhone, and then I go home and I flatten, because
Okay.
I'm trying to make it more abstract. And I'm really trying to go for really the play of light and dark, but yes, then I will sort of draw them.
Okay.
And I'll sketch them, and then I'll blow them up, and I'll sketch them again, and I usually make about 4 or 5 different sketches,
Okay.
and there's a lot of back and forth, and then of course you have to turn it over.
Sure.
Because
It's the reverse, right? All right.
and so yeah, there's a lot of that sort of starting, and that's the general flow of things.
Thank you.
And now the telephone poles, yeah, I'm gonna admit, I trace those.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I did.
there's no shame in it. They're just too accurate. I mean, it's.
I just didn't get it. I tried to sketch them. I did. I tried to be an honest artist, and I tried to draw them.
It's yeah.
Do you use these plates over and over and over again for like eternity, or what's their lifespan usually?
That is a really great question. So far, I haven't worn out the line cuts. I have worn out the dry points. You know, beyond a certain point, what happens with a dry point is when you etch into the plastic, and it creates kind of a burn. The plastic actually comes up, and that's what grabs the ink. And after a certain amount of time running through the press, that you just can't get that burn. And you can't scrape any more out plastic up, because then it will go right through the plastic. So yeah. So there's a limited number. I think it's about, I really don't know. I haven't really hit the maximum iteration. But the way I work, I kind of want my line of cuts to break down a little bit. I want to soften that edge, and I want you to kind of think that it's something that's been sublimated to memory, something that's a little bit not quite here and now. Yes, ma'am.
I noticed that when you were printing, you picked up the picture, put the next thing down. You don't use registers? How, usually, we used to,
You
have
have
to
to
replace it.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, how is she doing that without having to replace it?
Well, I hate registering. I'm gonna be honest with you, I just hate it. And so the way I work is I work around that, but there are some things, like this guy,
Yeah.
I did have to register this one very
okay.
closely.
Because
I needed this color plate to merge into this color plate, and I needed these things to line up. And working on a plate this big, I'm telling you, was tough. Because I registered by placing, first of all, I attached the paper to the press bed in such a way that it would stay there. And then I had to take this giant plate, a little like, and I had to take this giant plate and fit it in. I created a kind of I basically took two blocks on the back and the top, and I wedged the plate in. I didn't get it absolutely perfect. I got it pretty close,
Oh, no, they're beautiful.
but it was tough. It's
I just really appreciate what you did, and as I say, that just struck me that you were
Well-
using the methods that I remember.
I don't like to admit that I just don't work very precisely. But part of it is the way I work with my blocks, to your point, I have a lot of blocks. And the idea is to create something that I can kind of slip in and slip out and work improvisationally. I like the dance more than the exactitude. This is why I don't do additions. I just get bored. I don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again. I only do that once a year for our holiday cards.
I didn't know. You said you don't use white,
I don't.
but that is very white.
That's a blue plate. I inked a blue plate, and I put my line of cut, uninked line of cut block on top of it, ran it through the press, pulled it away, and that's what got left. And I did it and the more I did it, the more ink I was pulling away. So you get wired spots from not from the paper. This is the thing about this method, and I learned this from a wonderful printmaker named Catherine Kernan. She's a woodcut artist in Boston. Do you know her? You're nodding your head. But she taught me this plate-to-plate ink transfer technique, and in this master class I took. And basically, again, her approach was you basically just work the plates as far as you can before you even touch the paper. So in this case, I had the plastic plate, which I inked up. I put the line of cut on top of it, ran it through the press. Then I came back, I put another different line of cut block on top of that, ran it through the press, pulled it away. And each time I'm pulling away more ink, but only in specific places. So I think there were like 2 or 3, maybe even 4 blocks that I worked that way to get that white.
But you said you don't necessarily work light to dark.
I probably work light to dark. But again, I'm not building it up on the paper. I'm building it through the different, I'm inking all the blocks first.
Yeah.
And then, but you're exactly right. Typically, my darkest plate goes last.
Yeah. So I think it's
The
great.
other thing about these inks, not to be a commercial for Cool inks, which I think are fabulous, there's a cool story with those, but they're very transparent. So traditional printmakers who use traditional Chardonnay inks, these are wonderful inks. They're thick and creamy and juicy and just sticky. They're great inks, but with the transparency that I get, you gotta lean into what you got. I'm able to get some light bouncing around in the painting, in the piece, and that's what I love about the inks that I use.
Are they, how long last are they?
Well, I hope forever. I mean,
Well, we'll see.
I've only been doing this for about 6 years. But the Akua inks are being used by master printmakers across the United States. There is this big controversy about which is better oil or Akua, blah, blah, blah. But I personally think that these are pretty cool. But again, you have to lean into it. And, I hope they last as long as you want them to last. Have another question? I can see her. No?
Me?
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
For a lot of people know what the background of the process, but can you quickly explain what registering means, or?
Okay.
Technical?
Let's see. So registration is basically making sure that this color, if you, this color lines up perfectly with this color. That's the simplest way I can put it.
I get it.
Would you agree, Stella?
Yeah,
Pretty much.
the image
Yeah.
one's lined up.
Yeah, if you've got a more traditional, less sloppy and make a number of blocks, if they're doing color registration, they would make a number of blocks, and, or they do what they call suicide printing, which is reduction. I don't have the guts to be a reduction printer, but basically where you would cut, and then the next layer, you're basically cutting the white away. And so you cut the white away so that your next block that has a different color fits exactly into that white space.